Phone angry.
What would life be without Abiotic Factor? Empty. I'd be empty. So other than to show off my amazing fursuit for my maker, which you should commission if you're on a budget, by the way, link in the description, I just want to preface this video with I obviously love the game and respect the people behind it. I have like zero development or programming skills or any idea what goes on behind game production, so maybe some things I suggest are simply impossible or too far-fetched, who really knows. And the game is still in early access after all, so maybe some of the things I talk about in this video or things suggested at large will be implemented by maybe even the upcoming Dark Energy update, and if so, that's great. We only want this game to get better and better after all, so if you have any suggestions for the game as well, let me know in the comments. Anyways, enjoy the video.
So I think the one thing the vast majority of the Abiotic Factor community can agree on is the first introduction to the story, gameplay, and general vibe of the game is genuinely amazing, if you're going in blind that is. In my case, discovering Abiotic Factor randomly while doom scrolling Steam with $30 in my pocket, the simple depiction of a survival game set in a Half-Life-esque facility sounded pretty interesting on its own, and I was sold. Even with the heavily Half-Life inspired setting, the tutorial experience and introduction, dropping into the offices for the first time, hearing the emergency PA system,
Welcome to the Gate Cascade Research Facility,
fumbling around in the vents fighting off pests, and opening an email terminal for the first time felt so unique and made me want more. It made the slow progression into the other sectors so much more charming and memorable. The world felt huge even if we were confined underground in a god knows how big facility. The imagination can really run wild, and I'd be willing to bet a large amount of players invested in the story can relate to an extent with my experience. And honestly, this is Abiotic Factor's biggest strength: world building and the power of suspension. The world building begins as soon as you boot up your first game, and if you're truly green on the lore, playing through and piecing together the history of this company you work for through NPC interactions, emails, voice logs, and environmental factors feels so captivating. And it's what kickstarted my drive into starting my presence here on YouTube. And if that isn't convincing enough to tell you how good the game is, I don't know what is. And of course, if the only merit to Abiotic Factor was a good story, we'd all be reading a book, and books are boring. The gameplay is an amazing conductor to the narrative. The building system, exploration, and map design work super well to really paint the Deep Field team's vision. But as a game, it does have its issues, which is what this video is about. So think of the gameplay like a really nice car. It drives smooth and has good gas mileage, but it has some scratch paint on the left side above the wheel, and sometimes the catalytic converter falls out when you hit a speed bump. It just needs a bit of work. And let's say the story is Christian Bale driving said vehicle, or Arnold Schwarzenegger. It will get him to point A and B, but why drive this car when they could be driving a Bugatti? The game is already great, but could be the best. Let's talk about it. First, I want to talk about some simple core features of gameplay. As a survival game, you can expect the usual food/thirst systems and other maintenance gauges. Abiotic does it well in many aspects. Thirst and hunger are easy to manage, and food and such are plentiful, but to a fault. Hear me out. Hunger and thirst are genuine issues when first starting the game. The majority of doors locked and general scarcity made you really feel stranded, like you were juggling exploration, base building, and your basic needs. As you progress and fridges, resources, and infinite water sources become more abundant, your character's upkeep becomes kind of a chore. Water and food are so abundant by the final few quests in the current timeline, it's basically a non-issue and can be covered by farmable single items. And obviously, as you become more powerful and experienced, your resources and convenience should grow. That's good game design. What I actually have a problem with is the more advanced food systems, not the overall scarcity or availability. See, Abiotic Factor has a really big roster of cooking items and soups. Up to a dozen or so cooking items are usually added in updates here and there. And don't get me wrong, the cooking system has its uses, and some may even enjoy this side of the game explicitly, but I believe it's just kind of a novelty compared to the ease of actually upkeeping yourself, and novelty only goes so far for the majority of players. Especially with the rather buggy cooking appliances and food-oriented class, all of which I'll talk about later, I think the system needs some changing up. A super simple solution I feel would be great to spice up the overall progression/experience of cooking is adding some simple percentage buffs to every food item to a degree, to incentivize gathering ingredients and cooking. Yes, buffs are present already, but are mostly delegated to soups and skill XP gain buffs and a slower hunger and thirst drain buff. But what I mean is, maybe add small incremental buffs to functions and interactions like jump, speed, crouch speed, roll distance, damage reduction, etc, etc. Exponentially increase these buffs by giving small percentages or time durations to raw ingredients. Then components get a marginally better buff, and final cooking products give a big buff and maybe even a small debuff if the effect is too powerful. This can also serve as a good precursor to a possible alchemy update maybe shown in the Crush Dip trailer here, so it all really comes together. The hands-on style of cooking and the focus on short-term ingredient storage would really make cooking a worthwhile thing to focus on, instead of a largely inconsequential system in the grand scheme of things. Building, probably one of the biggest hooks and interests of the vast majority of players, me included, is obviously a huge part of the game's loop. The scrappy nature of gathering up random office objects and other miscellaneous furniture and building yourself a shack or mega base is very satisfying, but could be better. Do you understand the video title yet? Some simple quality of life features could really elevate it to the next level. Something everyone and their great grandmas have been asking for is grid snapping. And yes, I know you've read 10 Steam forums in a row about grid snapping, but it's for good reason. Abiotic Factor has a very generic building system. You point and you place, and that's it. As of now, the building system has no quality of life or nuance, which leads to some very frustrating, uneven, and messy builds sometimes, especially at a larger scale. Obviously, I'm not asking for Valheim levels of structural support planning and snapping, or Minecraft level of miscellaneous blocks and variants, but I think Abiotic Factor should get on top of that demand for grid snapping eventually. Introduce a side-to-side directional snapping from object to object, or just global grid snapping to all objects like the most popular mod in the game, which is infuriating to use, by the way. This one simple thing could boost the replayability and just ease of use by a lot, without the use of for now buggy mods. Next one is a more broad spectrum of criticism, and it's the customizability and availability of furniture and other building items. And what the hell does that mean? Well, like I said before, scrappy and office items. When I first started playing, I had imagined being able to pick up literally everything and mold furniture into my own building style. Is that a tad bit unrealistic? Yes. Will I still talk about it? Yes, to give credit, the game does have a large roster of environmental furniture, but to be honest, they feel out of place in their own setting if I had to put it into words. Personally, once you begin snowballing your progression through the game and raw materials become abundant, the player's makeshift furniture catalog becomes much more appealing and is usually what I use to make my builds look more cohesive. The random assortment of shelves, bookshelves, chairs, and desks can look very mix and match. A solution I propose, instead of just adding more furniture, is having the ability to repurpose and customize the existing roster of furniture, as in give a special use to smaller furniture objects and let us repaint anything we want. So let's use the humble park trash bin as an example. As we all know, there has yet to be a convenient way to permanently delete items from your world, and a system like this could solve little things like that in a creative way. Maybe change trash bins into a way to permanently delete items dropped in after you pick up said trash can and place them down again. Maybe have it so the items are not deleted until you close the bin's inventory menu, and have little trash icons in the bin's inventory squares to indicate its use. I guarantee you I'd have 3 of these in every room painted accordingly. Another very basic idea I had to add another layer to the building. Calling back to my first few hours of playtime, I had imagined a sort of automation system or intricate logistics system would be waiting for me at the endgame. I remember first seeing the item transporter upgrade, I had envisioned being able to maybe chain crafting benches to increase the size of the item teleportation. Little things like that. My excitement when I saw base logistics on the roadmap was only overcome by the disappointment of only receiving the moisture teleporter. A mix of global furniture painting, unique customization, and even basic logistics would add a whole new vertices to the decoration and building system. And speaking of vertices, a huge roadblock me and some other people have run into while building is vertical building options. Off the very top of my head, most vertical options boil down to bridges and shelves, which aren't exactly great on their own anyways, and some really basic verticality like ladders, roof/floors, and even bridge support rework that removes the need to be built off ledges would make base design so much more interesting. Segue that into hanging objects/decorations. Another big roadblock when building I run into, especially in bigger, wider spaces, is empty spaces on walls. Sure, paintings and posters are a thing, and I already did that. doesn't look great by the way, but maybe some hanging signs, item displays, and especially lighting coupled with grid snapping could make some really aesthetic bases. Now this is something I'm sure many people have had in the back of their head, and that's a job system rework / refresh. Now I know this is definitely a hard one to tackle in basically every facet of game dev, especially with balancing, but I think the fact the game is still in early access, there's a bit of wiggle room for experimenting. The game's level system at its core is very basic. You do an action and you get XP. Every couple of levels, you get a generic skill like faster healing and sometimes more unique ones like gaining the ability to roll depending on what you're leveling. The problems in this system arise when you introduce the job system. The jobs in Abiotic Factor are very simple as well. Depending on the job you pick, you receive a boost in starting levels, an XP multiplier for associated skills, and some even have crafting XP bonuses for recipe groups. Now this sounds pretty good, just pick what you like and develop a playstyle around the XP boost you get, and a nice head start. And I'd be inclined to agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that every other job can eventually unlock these generic skills and your job becomes obsolete after only a few steps into progression, especially in multiplayer, where the added manpower really makes the distinction between skill sets almost obsolete. I've seen solutions thrown around like adding hard-coded buffs like in the case of defense analyst, or locking out entire unassociated skills for jobs, both of which I think would be horrific band-aid fixes that would shift the job system from mediocre to insufferable, especially for solo players, who won't be able to have their job's negatives be covered by their teammates' skill sets. Building on instead of reducing from is the best course of action for the job system, and I'll be using my good friend and thumbnail artist 2Gupsy's awesome concept to demonstrate. This concept is great. Jobs have their own unique unlockable skills built into the already existing skill system unavailable to any other jobs, as well as unique crafting recipes to discover and work for, also built into the existing skill system. This rework could push the co-op into a new level and introduce so many synergies, playstyles, and interactions without reducing or gaining off any content. Now some general gameplay things I have a few gripes over. First is combat and difficulty. Specifically at higher difficulties. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty stoked when I heard about difficulty settings being added in Community Update 2, and was looking forward to some crazy spawn numbers or maybe even some slight reworks, and was just as disappointed when I realized Apocalyptic, the hardest difficulty, was simply a revert of the enemy spawn rates before the multiplayer dynamic difficulty change. An idea I had for spicing up the difficulty on the enemy front is giving all or the majority of the mobs in the game variants unique to Apocalyptic. Now, I admit this is probably the most outlandish suggestion just off the workload it need alone, but I really do think something like this would be crazy fun to fight against. I mean, imagine reworks like these. Peccaries chain their lightning tackle on successful hit until it's blocked or misses. Exor monks leave a trail behind their teleport path that deals damage over time, and has its blast changed into a burst. Reworks like these are what I'm looking forward to the most, be in future updates or mods. Fingers crossed. On the other side of the difficulty coin is early game difficulty spikes. One of the members in my Discord server brought this up and I agree with it heavily. There's a few notable spots during progression where a very noticeable day and night difficulty spike happened. Adjustment Wing and Canaan come to mind. The labs are naturally difficult, but the introduction to Adjustment Wing is a stark contrast from the very empty first few steps, and if you're not locked in and using the best weaponry available, those Exors will kick your ass. I still have PTSD from release Canaan, but luckily they were nerfed. Buffed, so they're not that big of an issue anymore, but fighting them is like fighting 50 brick skyscrapers when first starting out and ill-equipped, so I think some tweaks are definitely still on the chopping block for the upcoming updates. Lastly is some pet peeves for our little gate pad. First, these maps are unreadable. I don't know if I'm a little slow in the head, I am, but I couldn't understand these maps the first, second, or 15th time I read them. Another thing is the existence of missable entries for lore, and I think all of you can understand why this one would be a big gripe for me. I've had to ask a friend of mine to let me borrow his save world files multiple times for that Brainalyzer sync, so maybe add an NPC or tweak the Brainalyzer to update our gate pads accordingly somehow. And that's all I've got. There's a ton more nuanced things I could possibly talk about, but I tried to keep this video in the prospecting spirit instead of the harp on bugs / balance spirit in light of the upcoming Dark Energy update, which I'm sure we're all excited about, and the devs are even more excited about releasing. Anyways, I've been Myriad, your favorite early access yapper, and have a good day or night. Bye bye.